On a freezing New Year's Eve, an unexpected encounter between a homeless veteran and a determined stranger set off a chain of events that no one saw coming. This is a story of hope, resilience, and the power of kindness. It was the evening of December 31st in Chicago, and the city was alive with the energy of New Year's Eve celebrations. The streets sparkled with holiday lights, and the air was filled with the sound of laughter, music, and the occasional cheer from excited revelers. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the dark sky, coating Michigan Avenue in a soft, white blanket. Donald Trump, clad in a long navy blue coat and his signature red tie, strolled down the bustling street. He had just wrapped up a business meeting and decided to walk back to his hotel to enjoy the festive atmosphere. The cold didn't seem to bother him as he observed this city's vibrancy. As he passed a corner near Millennium Park, something caught his eye. A man sitting hunched against a building, his knees drawn up to his chest. His tattered jacket did little to shield him from the biting wind, and his hands trembled as he held a cardboard sign that read, "Veteran in need, please help." The man's face was pale, his eyes sunken and tired. Passers-by rushed past him, absorbed in their celebrations, sparing only fleeting glances. Trump slowed his pace, his gaze fixed on the man. There was something about the weary, almost defeated look in the veteran's eyes that made him stop in his tracks. Ignoring the curious glances from onlookers, Trump approached the man. He crouched down to his level, his expression soft yet concerned. "Sir," Trump said gently, "what's your name?" The man looked up, startled. For a moment, he seemed unsure if Trump was really speaking to him. "John," he replied after a pause, his voice hoarse and uncertain. "John," Trump repeated, his voice steady. "You're a veteran, aren't you?" "Yes, sir," John answered, his tone barely above a whisper. "Served in the Marines for 15 years, but, things haven't been easy since." Trump nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Well, John," he said firmly, "that's about to change. You're not spending another night out here." The wind howled through the streets, a sharp reminder of the brutal Chicago winter. Snowflakes danced around them, but neither Trump nor John seemed to notice. Trump looked at the man before him. His face was weathered, his cheeks hollowed by hunger and hardship. The man clutched his thin jacket closer, his knuckles raw and red from the cold. "What's your name, sir?" Trump asked, his voice low but commanding. "What's your The man hesitated. His eyes flickered, scanning Trump's face, as though trying to decide if this was real. "John?" he said finally, his voice rough, barely audible over the hum of the crowd. Trump crouched down, leveling his gaze. "John," he repeated, as if committing the name to memory. "Tell me about yourself. What's your story?" John's breath hitched, visible in the cold air. He looked away, the words caught in his throat. "I served in the Marines," he said quietly, his voice trembling. 15 years. 2 tours overseas. The last... And, sorry, I don't have a word for this. God, I had a... Trump nodded, his expression steady but thoughtful. "That's a long time," he said. "What happened?" John's shoulders slumped, as though the weight of his story bore down on him. "I came back," he began, his voice faltering. "I thought I'd find work, a place to settle down, but..." He paused, his hands shaking slightly. "It wasn't that easy." The bustling city around them seemed to fade as John continued. His voice, though unsteady, carried a heaviness that demanded attention. "I couldn't keep a job. The nightmares, the noise, the crowds, they wouldn't stop. Everything reminded me of the tours. I tried. I really tried." Trump stayed silent, his sharp eyes focused on John's face. "I went to work everything," John said, his words tumbling out now, as though he had carried them for too long. "My job, my apartment, my family. I started drinking to cope. And then I, I just gave up, he said. And then, I never gave up, John said. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind and the distant hum of New Year's revelers. Trump shifted slightly, his brow furrowed. PTSD? He asked gently. Ah, John nodded, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. They gave it a name, but not much else. Therapy was expensive. The VA, overbooked. I was just another file in a stack. What, hog? Trump's jaw tightened. His usual air of authority was tempered with something else now. Disbelief, anger, compassion. Why hasn't anyone helped you? He asked, his voice almost sharp. John's gaze dropped to his hands. I guess people don't know what to do with someone like me, he said. I don't blame them. I barely know what to do with myself. And he stopped, his eyes getting hard for a moment. But then a light shone. Trump exhaled, his breath visible in the icy air. He looked at John for a long moment, the weight of the man's words settling over him. You served this country for 15 years, Trump said firmly, and this is how it repays you. John looked up, startled by the intensity in Trump's voice. He didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. Trump shook his head, the wheels in his mind clearly turning. John, he said, his tone resolute, this isn't how your story ends. The chill bit harder now, as though the wind itself carried the weight of John's story. Trump stood, his coat billowing slightly, his expression steeled with resolve. He looked down at John, still huddled against the cold. This ends tonight, Trump said, his voice firm but quiet. John blinked, his breath hitching. What? Trump reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved swiftly, the glow of the screen illuminating his focused expression. You're not spending another night out here, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. John stared at him, confused and hesitant. I don't understand, he murmured. You will, Trump replied, bringing the phone to his ear. A crisp, efficient voice answered on the other end. Mr. Trump? Margaret, Trump began, his voice steady and commanding. I need you to find the nearest hotel with availability, something clean, warm, and safe. Yes, sir, right away, came Margaret's immediate response. And that's not all, Trump continued. I want you to arrange for a doctor to meet us there, someone who can do a thorough checkup. Call ahead, make it urgent. Understood, Mr. Trump, Margaret replied. One more thing, he added. He's gonna need clothes, warm ones. Make sure the hotel staff is ready. Margaret's response was swift. Consider it done, sir. Trump ended the call and turned back to John. For a moment he said nothing, simply studying the man before him. Then he knelt again, his gaze meeting John's. Help is on the way, he said. But we're not waiting around doing nothing. Trump scanned the street and spotted a small food cart nearby, its windows fogged from the steam of hot drinks and soups. Come on, he said, extending a hand to John. John hesitated, looking at Trump's hand as if unsure it was real. Slowly, he reached out and took it. Trump helped him to his feet, steadying him as they walked toward the cart. The vendor, an older man with a friendly face, greeted them with a warm smile. What can I get you? 2 coffees, Trump said, his tone brisk but polite. He glanced at John. And what do you want to eat? John hesitated again, his eyes darting to the menu. I don't know, he stammered. Trump turned to the vendor. Soup and a sandwich, he said. Something hot. But within moments, the vendor handed them a steaming bowl of soup, a sandwich wrapped in foil, and 2 cups of coffee. Trump handed one to John, who accepted it with trembling hands. Drink? Trump urged, gently. John took a cautious sip, the warmth spreading through his cold body. He looked down at the cup, then back at Trump. Why? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Trump tilted his head slightly. Why what? Why are you doing this for me? John's voice broke, his eyes brimming with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. You don't even know me, he said. as he opened the bottle and drained off most of the interior of the remnant. Trump was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because no one else should have let you fall this far." His tone was soft but firm, filled with conviction. "And because I can." They stood near the food cart, the aroma of coffee and soup mingling with the cold night air. John ate slowly, savoring each bite, his hands still shaking. Trump watched him, his expression thoughtful but unreadable. I don't deserve this," John murmured, breaking the silence. Trump's gaze snapped to him. "You're wrong," he said sharply but not unkindly. "You've given more to this country than most people ever will. If anyone deserves a second chance, it's you." John swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it difficult to respond. Minutes later, the sound of an approaching engine cut through the quiet. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. The driver stepped out, dressed impeccably in a tailored coat. He opened the back door and nodded respectfully at Trump. "Mr. Trump, everything is ready," he said. "What?" Trump turned to John. "Let's go," he said simply, helping him into the car. John hesitated again, his hand gripping the doorframe. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice breaking. Trump smiled faintly, his eyes kind but determined. "You don't need to thank me, John," he said. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" John asked. "Someday, when you're back on your feet, pay it forward," Trump said. "Help someone else the way I'm helping you." John nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "I will," he said, his voice steadier now. As the car pulled away, Trump leaned back in his seat, glancing at John. For the first time that night, there was a spark of hope in the veteran's tired eyes. And for Trump, that was enough. The sleek black SUV glided through the snowy Chicago streets, its tires crunching against the fresh powder. Inside, the silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the engine. John sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his eyes darting nervously between the window and Trump. "Relax," Trump said, his tone calm but firm. "You're safe now." John nodded but said nothing. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, his knuckles white. The SUV slowed, turning into the grand entrance of a luxury hotel. The building gleamed against the night sky, its glass facade reflecting the city's lights. Two doormen rushed forward, their uniforms crisp despite the chill in the air. Trump stepped out first, adjusting his coat as he surveyed the scene. Then he turned back to John, offering his hand once more. "Come on," he said. John hesitated, his eyes widening as he took in the opulent surroundings. I don't belong here," he muttered, his voice shaky. "It was because of the beats." Trump's expression softened, but his tone left no room for argument. "Yes, you do," he said firmly. "Now, let's go." The hotel staff had been prepped by Margaret, and their smiles were warm and genuine as they approached. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, stepped forward. "Welcome, Mr. John," she said, her voice soothing. "We've prepared everything for you." John blinked, caught off guard by the attention. "Me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir," she replied, gesturing toward the entrance. "Please, come inside." John shuffled forward, his steps tentative. Trump walked beside him, a steadying presence. Inside, the warmth of the lobby enveloped them, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. The polished marble floors and glittering chandeliers seemed like something out of a dream. "This way," the staff member said, leading them to the elevators. They rode up in silence, the soft ding of the elevator marking each passing floor. When the doors opened, John stepped into a suite that took his breath away. The room was spacious and inviting, with a plush bed dressed in crisp white linens. A steaming cup of tea sat on the nightstand, its aroma filling the air. Warm clothes were neatly folded on the armchair, and the bathroom door was ajar, revealing a large, gleaming shower. The basin and the wall were colorful, log chairs draped along the walls, and a piano was playing a boring middle of an anime. John stood frozen in the doorway. This, this isn't for me, he said, shaking his head. Trump placed a hand on his shoulder. Yes, it is, he said quietly. Go on, take a shower, change into those clothes. You've earned this. Yeah. While John showered, the doctor arrived, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and a warm smile. Mr. Trump, she said, shaking his hand. Where's our patient? He'll be out in a minute, Trump replied. When John emerged dressed in fresh clothes, his face was clean but etched with disbelief. The doctor greeted him warmly and motioned for him to sit by the small table. Let's take a look at you, she said. John complied, his movements cautious. The doctor examined his frostbitten hands, treating the raw skin with a soothing balm. She asked him about his health, his history, his struggles. John answered honestly, his voice growing steadier with each word. You've been through a lot, the doctor said gently, handing him a prescription for medication to manage his stress and insomnia. But you're tougher than you think. We'll get you back on track. John looked at her, his eyes brimming with gratitude. Thank you, he whispered. As the doctor packed her things and left, Trump pulled up a chair beside John. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room was quiet, the muffled sounds of the city far below barely audible. John broke the silence. I don't know how to thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Trump shook his head. You don't need to thank me, he said firmly. You've done enough for this country. It's time someone steps up for you. John swallowed hard, his hands clasped tightly together. I didn't think anyone cared, he admitted. Not after everything. Trump's gaze was steady. Well, they should, he said. You shouldn't have been left out there, not after what you sacrificed. John's eyes glistened, but he nodded, the smallest hint of hope flickering in his expression. That night, for the first time in years, John lay in a warm bed. The soft sheets and gentle hum of the room's heater were almost foreign to him. As he drifted off to sleep, he thought about Trump's words, about the doctor's reassurances, and about the small, steady flame of hope that had started to burn within him, and I might even say just that second night. In that moment, he didn't feel like a forgotten soldier or a man lost in the cold. He felt, for the first time, like someone who mattered. Margaret worked fast. By the time the sun began to rise over the Chicago skyline, her phone buzzed with confirmation from Veterans United Support Services. Their representative, Lisa, was already on her way. In the quiet of the hotel suite, John sat near the window, gazing out at the city below. He sipped a cup of tea slowly, his hands steadier now. The warmth of the room and the care he'd received had softened some of the tension in his shoulders, but uncertainty still clouded his eyes. The knock at the door startled him. Trump walked over, opening it to reveal a young woman with an energetic smile and a bright scarf wound tightly around her neck. Lisa, thank you for coming, Trump said, stepping aside to let her in. She moved forward confidently, extending a hand toward John. Why, John, I'm Lisa. It's so nice to meet you. John hesitated, then shook her hand. Hi, he said quietly. Lisa took a seat across from him, placing a folder on the coffee table between them. I work with Veterans United. Margaret told us about your situation, and we're here to help you get back on your feet. Her voice was steady but kind, every word carefully chosen to put him at ease. John glanced at the folder, then back at Lisa. How does this work? He asked. Well, Lisa began, flipping open the folder. We start by securing you a place to live. I've already found a transitional housing unit not far from here. It's quiet, clean, and run by people who specialize in helping veterans. Isabel considered her next words carefully. She believed in the power of cleverness, and she certainly did not believe in exile or award. Like, this is some kind of joke? Lisa began, pulling her hand away from a threatening zip tie. What about you? I asked, setting it down again. John nodded slowly, his brow furrowing as he processed her words. But we don't stop there, she continued. We'll also enroll you in a job training program, something that fits your skills and interests. You've already given so much. Now it's our turn to support you. For the first time, a spark of hope flickered in John's eyes. Really? Lisa smiled warmly. Really. And we'll connect you with mental health resources too. Counseling, therapy, whatever you need. We want to make sure you're not just surviving, but thriving. John leaned back in his chair, his breath shaky but lighter. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, Lisa assured him. This is about giving you the tools to rebuild. We'll walk with you every step of the way. Trump, who had been watching quietly, spoke up. You've got a team now, John. You're not doing this alone. He broke the silence with one last question. John looked between Lisa and Trump, his voice faltering. Why are you all doing this for me? I'm nobody. Trump's expression hardened slightly, a hint of frustration mixed with determination. You're not nobody. You're a veteran, a man who put his life on the line for this country. Don't ever forget that. Lisa nodded in agreement. Exactly. And now it's time for us to show up for you. As the conversation continued, the pieces of John's new plan began to fall into place. Lisa outlined the timeline for his housing and job training. She reassured him that he'd have ongoing support and regular check-ins to ensure he stayed on track. When she left, John sat in silence for a moment, his hands clasped tightly together. He glanced at Trump, who was standing by the window now, looking out at the city below. Mr. Trump, John began, his voice thick with emotion. Trump turned, his expression softening. Yes, John. Well, I don't know how to thank you for any of this. Trump walked over, taking the seat across from John. You don't need to thank me, he said simply. Just promise me one thing. John tilted his head slightly, curious. What's that? When you're back on your feet, pay it forward, Trump said. Help someone else the way we're helping you. John's eyes glistened as he nodded. I will, he said, his voice steady for the first time. I promise. Trump reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a check. He slid it across the table toward John, who froze, his eyes wide. This is for your immediate expenses, Trump explained. Clothes, food, whatever you need to get started. The foundation will cover your housing and medical bills for the next year, but this is for you. John stared at the check, his hands trembling as he picked it up. This is too much. Trump shook his head. No, it's not. It's what you deserve. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of the gesture sinking in. Finally, John spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You've changed my life. Trump smiled faintly. You're going to do great things, John. I can feel it. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, John felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. For the first time, he believed that the future might hold something more than cold nights and empty streets. It might hold a chance to start over. And that chance was more than he'd ever dared to dream. The clock ticked closer to midnight. Outside the hotel, the city buzzed with excitement. Cheers and laughter echoed through the streets as crowds gathered for the New Year's Eve countdown. From the suite, the glow of fireworks could be seen reflecting off the Chicago skyline, their colors shimmering in the icy air. Inside, the warmth was almost tangible. The hotel's grand ballroom was alive with festive energy. Twinkling fairy lights lined the walls, and a chandelier cast a golden glow over the crowd. The sound of clinking glasses and soft laughter mixed with the upbeat melody of a live band. John stood near the edge of the room, hands tucked into the pockets of his new jacket. His eyes darted nervously, unsure of his place in all this. The staff had been nothing but kind, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. John, Lisa called out, weaving through the crowd toward him. Her smile was wide, her steps quick. You can't stand over here all night. Come on, join us. John hesitated, glancing toward the lively group gathered near the center of the room. Trump was there, speaking animatedly to Margaret and a few others, his presence commanding yet approachable. I don't know, John muttered. This doesn't feel like my kind of thing. Lisa placed a hand on his arm, her voice softening. It's a celebration, John. Not just for the new year, but for you. As you pulled toward her, you noticed that Lisa and John's sons had learnt to control their eating behavior. Her words hung in the air, cutting through his doubt. Slowly, John nodded. As he stepped forward, the chatter quieted for a moment, heads turning toward him. Someone raised a glass, then another, until the room erupted in cheers and applause. John froze, unsure how to respond. Trump stepped forward, his smile genuine. This is your night, John, he said, clapping him on the back. Enjoy it. The Trump kicked again, the Trump whispered. The group welcomed him warmly, conversations flowing easily despite his initial shyness. Someone handed him a glass of sparkling cider, and Lisa made sure to keep him engaged, introducing him to staff and nonprofit representatives alike. For the first time in years, John didn't feel invisible. As the countdown began, the room buzzed with anticipation. 10 seconds. 9. The crowd chanted together, voices rising in unison. John stood among them, his heart pounding. He wasn't just a spectator anymore. He was part of something. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! The room erupted in cheers. Balloons and streamers fell from the ceiling as the sound of fireworks boomed outside. People hugged and clinked glasses, laughter filling every corner of the space. John stood still, taking it all in. He turned toward the window, drawn by the vibrant display of fireworks lighting up the night sky. The bursts of red, gold, and blue seemed to paint a brighter future, one filled with possibilities he hadn't dared to imagine. In that moment, he reflected on the whirlwind of the past few hours, the cold streets, the stranger who had stopped, the kindness that had followed. It didn't seem real, yet here he was, standing warm, safe, and hopeful, surrounded by people who believed in him. Trump approached quietly, standing beside him at the window. For a moment, neither of them spoke, their gazes fixed on the brilliant lights in the sky. Feels different, doesn't it? Trump said finally. John nodded, his voice catching in his throat. Yeah, it does. Trump turned toward him, his expression thoughtful. This is just the beginning, John. The rest is up to you. And John looked at him, the weight of those words sinking in. He nodded again, his chest tightening with a mix of gratitude and determination. I won't waste it, he said quietly. Trump smiled faintly. Good. As the fireworks continued to light up the sky, John felt something he hadn't in years, a sense of belonging. This wasn't just a new year, it was a new start. And for the first time, he believed it. By morning, the city had quieted, its streets coated in a fresh layer of snow. The hotel suite, once filled with the buzz of celebration, was now calm and serene. John sat by the window, a notebook open on the table before him. Pages were filled with scribbled ideas, a plan, a way forward. Lisa's words from the night before echoed in his mind, as did the cheers of the crowd and Trump's steady reassurances. For the first time in years, John felt like the pieces of his life weren't just scattered fragments. Trump entered the room quietly. He looked at John, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. How are you feeling? Trump asked. John looked up hopeful, he said. Trump nodded, satisfied. Good. John stood, walking over to shake Trump's hand. I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay this, he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. You don't have to, Trump replied. Pay it forward when you can. John nodded firmly. I will, I promise. As Trump left the hotel, the crisp morning air filled his lungs. He glanced back once, a quiet sense of satisfaction washing over him. In a matter of hours, one life had been transformed. But it wasn't just about John. It was a reminder of what could happen when someone cared enough to act. This new year, let's resolve to make a difference in someone's life. A small act of kindness can change everything. Let's make this the year we lift each other up. Thank you for watching this heartfelt story of kindness and transformation. As we step into the new year, let's carry forward the spirit of hope and generosity. Remember, a small act of kindness can create ripples that change lives. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us spread positivity and bring more impactful stories to light. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Together, let's make 2025 a year of compassion and meaningful change. Happy New Year.